Well, what is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome into the Hump Day Hotline. I am your co-host, Joe Miller. You can find me on Twitter at Joe Miller Wired, and that is my other co-host over there,
Jay Spence the King. Same place on Twitter. You can find me at Jay Spence the King.
And we are joined by the one and the only, the man who doesn't really need an introduction, especially if you're on Twitter or listen to Buffalo Bills podcasts, Mr. Bruce Exclusive, Bruce Nolan. Bruce, how you doing?
Dude, folks, it's a party all the time. Just disco balls, dancers, the whole thing.
Do you have disco dancers and ball dancers?
Wouldn't you like to know?
I would.
Nice try, FBI.
I definitely don't work for the FBI, but I would like to know that. But Bruce, welcome into the show. We are excited to have you here. Jay Spence, how's your day going? How's the Patriots jersey treating you?
Oh man, I'm cool. I'm rocking my cam today, showing some love to my guy. I've been neglecting the Cam Newton everything. I haven't really talked much about him lately. So, I figured it would be a good time to dust the cam off and throw it on today.
We are legit in the lull, the darkest part of the entire NFL season, as I like to call it. And Spence has heard me say this, Bruce. I'm going to say it with you on here as well. Once again, for Bills Mafia, all the people in the chat, Brian Bowers in the chat, EB's in the chat, Chris Jenkins in the chat, Daniel Gowers in the chat, Richard Rush in the chat, everybody's in the chat. Do not wish your summer away. Enjoy your summertime. I spent a lot of years wishing the summer away, trying to get to training camp. If July could just end, and I would just encourage Bills Mafia to not do that. Enjoy your summertime. Take it in. Take a deep breath. The season will be here before you know it, and summer will be over, and then we're in elite season. NFL season. But regardless, do not wish your summer away, because winter, for most of us, not you, Spence, is right around the corner. But it is Hump Day. If you are, this is the first time you've joined us, if you've never been a part of Hump Day Hotline, let me just say welcome. We're excited that you guys are here. Like and subscribe. Hump that like button, whatever platform you are on. Jump on that like button. Also subscribe, especially if jump in.
I'm sorry. I know. I just want to jump in real quick. I'm guessing E. Griff is the gentleman from earlier that Bruce had the thing with. I will just warn you. I will just warn you. We absolutely can mute you here. We can put you in timeout. So behave. Behave.
That's fantastic. But yeah, jump on that like button, hump the like button. Also, we're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers on Buffalo Rumblings YouTube channel. We're at 877. So if you have not yet subscribed on the Buffalo Rumblings YouTube channel, please do so. But with that, Daniel Gowers has called me a troublemaker. What did I do wrong? I did something wrong.
I feel like you got suspended on a different show where I'm timeout, and every week now that's the joke between you.
Yeah. So I was on another outlet's video chat, right? They were doing YouTube stuff, and because I love to peruse them all. I love to bounce around between Built in Buffalo and Cold Front Report and Fanatics and you name it. I just like to be honest with you, we've talked about it, Spence. I love being in the chat. I talk about the chat. The chat is so much fun. So for me, there's a lot of fun about being there. And all of a sudden, for no absolute reason whatsoever, I got put in timeout, and the chat blew up. The chat blew up. Like, why is Joe Miller in timeout? People just lost their minds. And I literally I was like, I'm out. And I left. I was like, I don't know what, and I got an apology afterwards, but it's like, I don't know what I did wrong, but
you were a troublemaker. I believe it.
Right. But we are here to talk tonight. Bruce Exclusive is not only with us, but he is also in the chatting with people. But we are going to be talking tonight. Tonight, the conversation is going to be centric around Josh Allen, the differences between 2020 and what the potential that 2021 brings. We're bringing in what I would consider, and I think what Spence would consider as well, an expert when it comes to Josh Allen and those types of things. It's good to see Jeff King in the chat. Welcome, Jeff King. But we're going to be talking about the season that Josh Allen had last year, how special it was. We're going to talk about what is the potential for Josh Allen this season, to include, is there a potential for a regression? And before anybody gets mad at me or mad at us, regression might not be such a terrible thing. It might not be oh my God, he's regressed. We need to find a new quarterback. And I think that's where Bills Mafia tends to jump, right? And then we're going to talk about the looming contract status. But before we do, Bruce, you're currently muted. So unmute your microphone. And why don't you do us a favor and just introduce yourself real quick for those of you that may, for those that are listening to us that may not know you, not know where to find you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, about your show. Go, Bruce.
For those of you in the comments or listening to this live on YouTube or Twitter or wherever you may be finding this, my name is Bruce Nolan. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Bruce Exclusive. I do a podcast called The Bruce Exclusive, which drops every Thursdays and Fridays on the Buffalo Rumblings Podcast Network. And I am an occasional dabbler in the written medium as well on BuffaloRumblings.com.
Yep. Fantastic. And if you are not following Bruce Nolan, please do yourself a favor and go follow him. And if you've been blocked by Bruce Nolan, do yourself a favor in the comment section right now. Apologize. I'm just going to say it. Apologize. But let's do this real quick. Bruce, do us a favor. We're going to get right to it. As it pertains to Josh Allen, and I know you've got a lot of opinions, and I know that people have their feelings about your opinions, but I think you're nothing but pragmatic as it pertains to Josh Allen. And I love your takes because of that. They are very much down to earth, centered. They're not, fan goggled. I wear fan goggles. I think Spence would tell you he wears fan goggles when it comes to Josh Allen. We love Josh Allen.
Wait. You wear fan goggles.
It's true.
I do not.
But you love Josh Allen.
I do love him, but not on not the way Buffalo loves it. Like, I love him and I think he's that great, but I also can be honest about him. I don't think a lot of Bills fans can be.
I think I've been honest. Anyways, regardless of that, real quick, Bruce, tell us real quick how special, when you think historically about quarterbacks in the NFL and making jumps, how special was 2020 for Josh Allen?
Historically special. And I'm not someone who is prone to hyperbole. That's not really my thing. But Josh Allen was number 2 in CPOE, which is completion percentage over expectation. He is number 3 in EPA per play, was number 5 in average net yards per attempt, was number 3 in QBR, was number 4 in passer rating, was number 3 in DVOA, and number 5 in PFF grade for the 2020 years, which means that those are a few of the major holistic quarterback advanced metrics that are intended to measure in totality how a quarterback played. Right? Each one of them is designed to be able to be a one-stop shop. Now, they each have their own strengths and weaknesses as far as metrics go, but every single one of them said he was a top 5 quarterback. All of them. There were no outliers. There were no buts. There were no gigantic discrepancies. Ben Roethlisberger, for example, was 19th in passer rating and 31st in CPOE.
Wow.
Now, if you know enough about those metrics, that can kind of tell you a story. Like, I can tell you why that is. But every single one, top 5 quarterback across the board.
Right.
The only other people who had that distinction where every single one was a top 5 quarterback, you ready for it? Here we go. Beginning of list, Aaron Rodgers. End of list. That's it. That's the end of the list. There were the only other quarterbacks who were top 5 in every single one of the holistic quarterback metrics I mentioned before.
Right.
So I've said it before. I'll say it again. For those listeners who have not heard me say this before, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't go absolutely bat crap crazy in 2020, the National Football League Most Valuable Player trophy is in a guy who has it in his trophy case, who looks good in shorts and plays in Orchard Park, New York.
That's right.
That's how good Josh Allen was in 2020. So that's part of the regression conversation, but it has to start with the jump conversation. Right. The jump conversation from 2019 is the beginning of any regression conversation. You cannot have a regression conversation about 2021 without first simultaneously recognizing how good 2020 was, and also recognizing that the same things that I just mentioned did not reflect overly positively about Josh Allen in 2019. So the jump was huge, the peak was amazing, and then here comes the next conversation, which is the regression conversation.
Yeah, and I think what's amazing about two things that to me that are amazing about this. Number one, is I was with you. A tweet was unearthed today where you said around, I don't know, week 8, week 9, week 10, week 11, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the rest of the season. Can he carry this momentum? I'm not going to lie to you, and I think Spence would say the same thing. There was definitely a feeling of, can he keep this up? After games 1 through 4, he got injured. We saw a little bit of a dip. And then he started to come back and like started to like take over games again. And there was a great deal of like, surely this can't go on forever. And it did. So talk about, were you surprised by that? Or did it at some point in time just be like, no, this is who this kid is?
I think for me, the thing that was interesting is that the beginning of the year and the end of the year were the pendulums for Josh Allen. The end of the year doesn't get talked about enough because the beginning of the year, he came out gangbusters and everyone's like, oh, okay. All right. I see you, Josh Allen. But I would actually argue that the most dominant stretch and the one that actually pulled his averages up was weeks 12 through 16 when he was lighting up the San Francisco 49ers and the New England Patriots in primetime games.
Right.
That was where he was having 400-yard games and absolutely demolishing his touchdown interception ratio and making people look silly and walking away from the Miami Dolphins, leaving them a bloody mess in his backyard. That's the way that Josh Allen kind of handled 2020. It was really the come out strong, have a little bit of a bump, get back on the horse, and then finish strong. And that was really Josh Allen's year. And the funny thing was the little bit of a lull was still better than a lot of what we had seen from him in 2019. And the, okay, we got back on the horse was better than what we saw from him in 2019. So even if he doesn't finish the year absolutely gangbusters, the median and mean are both still better than they were in 19. That's how significant the jump was. He didn't even need 2019 to be eclipsed by weeks 12 through 16 in order for it to be eclipsed.
Right. For context, for the people, before we move on to the conversation that is 2021, and then I'll let Spence jump in here too if he needs to. When you think about what he did in 2020, keep in mind, everybody, and I know a lot of you probably did not hear it, but Bruce and I, when I met Bruce, not personally, physically, when Bruce and I had our first conversation together, we did a pod together about Josh Allen, and I was not hopeful coming off of that conversation. I don't know how much of that you remember prior to the season in 2020, but we talked about Josh Allen, who he was as a quarterback. I felt very strongly that like great elite quarterbacks throw with anticipation. You made the comment that he doesn't need to throw with anticipation because he throws so hard. However, we found a Josh Allen in 2020 that was throwing with anticipation and still throwing the ball hard. There's a lot to be said for who he was, who he became, and what 2020 was. And to your point, not being necessarily an outlier. I love this question from Chris Jenke, from the real Chris Jenke. I would like to ask Bruce how Lamar Jackson's regression from MVP form could compare to a potential Josh Allen regression. Maybe. Do you think that's similar?
Well, let's look it up. So Lamar Jackson in 2019, let's pull up Lamar Jackson real fast. So he was 4th in average net yards per attempt, 1st in QBR, 3rd in passer rating, 2nd in DVOA, 3rd in PFF grade, 12th in CPOE, and 1st in EPA per play. So what this can tell you, if you know enough about the metrics, I don't really have time to go into all of them, but as a general rule, if you have CPOE as a significant negative outlier, what it typically means is you were being helped a lot by the scheme. That's typically what that means. You performed really well, but you were getting a lot of help. You were throwing to more open receivers. You have historically seen this with Patrick Mahomes, who has historically had a CPOE rank that was an outlier to the remainder of his holistic quarterback metrics. So that's what Lamar Jackson looked like in 2019. Josh Allen in 2020 did not look like that. Josh Allen, as previously mentioned, did not have a CPOE outlier, which is one of my favorite things to use to counter the conversation that historically pops up that it was all Brian Daboll. I once had a fan in my mentions of a different team who said that the Bills offense was mostly short passes to very open receivers, which could not possibly be farther from the truth. Josh Allen actually had the highest amount of true air yards per pass in the NFL. Which means his passes covered the largest amount of average distance of any quarterback in the NFL. Now, that may not have been distance perpendicular to the line of scrimmage, but he was throwing it longer on average. Now, one of the reasons you have a cannon and you can utilize it is because you don't necessarily have to throw it down the field. You can utilize it horizontally to stretch defenses with a cannon because you can make throws that people like Nate Peterman can't make because they get intercepted and run back for 6. Yep. So they're coming from different places to begin the conversation. So Jackson's 2019 MVP year and Allen's 2020 year that would have been an MVP year if not for Aaron Rodgers, they're coming from different places even though the holistics part kind of looks a little different, qualitatively, if you know why Jackson was really good in 2019, he was a dynamic runner, right? Which, of course, QBR and EPA per play both take into consideration. Running is a big deal, which is why he was number one in QBR and number one in EPA per play. That doesn't shock you knowing that. In addition, when CPOE is an outlier, you're getting some help from the scheme. You're being able to manufacture things in the scheme that make passing the ball easier. So when you know that about where Lamar Jackson started, then the next question is, okay, was there regression from Lamar? And the answer is yes, there was regression from Lamar. That absolutely happened in 2020. In 2020, I'm going to pull up Lamar real fast here, and we will make it work. I did not have it pulled up in front of me because I didn't quite know that we were going to go this direction for it. But Lamar Jackson in 2020 was 17th in average net yards per attempt, 7th in QBR, 11th in passer rating, 21st in DVOA, 18th in PFF grade, 25th in CPOE, and 10th in EPA per play. So again, you saw it. The peaks are what? The peaks are QBR and EPA per play, which again are the most heavily weighted by rushing. So what happened was the strengths remained the strengths, but the passing got less efficient and they started to get pulled down a little bit by CPOE. To me, this sounds like a Greg Roman issue.
Right.
That's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like Greg Roman starting to get figured out very similarly to the way he got figured out with Cap and very similar to the way that Tyrod had a regression and Buffalo. And that's Greg Roman is a really, really good offensive designer. He is not a really good offensive adapter.
Right. For sure. Bruce, or I'm sorry, Spence, you have something to question? Anything you want to jump in here real quick before I?
No, I'm lost in Bruce. You know, like it's like when I'm listening to Bruce, it sounds like I'm listening to a Bruce pod. So I'm just sitting here like, okay, I kind of want to pull out my notepad. I'm not even lying to you. So keep going, Bruce.
so for me, real quick, I think for me, from a statistical standpoint, as it pertains to Lamar versus what we saw from Josh, there was a significant amount of. And I love this topic and this part of the conversation, Bruce. And I love that this question was brought up. You know, how could they correlate, or how could they be, you know, consistent or similar Lamar regression to Allen regression? We didn't see growth from Lamar from 19 to 20. There was no growth. And to your point about Greg Roman, I love that point, because one of the things that amazes me about 2020 and Josh Allen, and specifically Brian Daboll, is what was working in 2019 very effectively was that Beasley kind of like in the slot, up 10 yards into the middle, and then darting to the end zone. That play was run very, very effectively all of 2019. And I don't think they completed that pass once. Like, they didn't throw it once in 2020. So there was a great amount of growth between 19 and 20 for not only Allen, but Daboll. And I don't think we saw the same from Lamar. Lamar did not grow that way from 19 to 20, to include still being hesitant to throw outside the numbers, which is the book on Lamar. Lamar is deadly inside the numbers down the middle of the field. Deadly accurate. Outside the numbers, not so much.
Yep.
Thoughts?
I get it. I understand it. I think part of this is naturally going to come to the Ravens fans and people who are Lamar Jackson defenders saying, well, he doesn't have a number one receiver. Look what it did for Josh. Mm-hmm. And quantitatively, that's correct. I think that the passing attack that you get from the Ravens is always going to be hindered a little bit by the fact that you don't have a true number one alpha. And that's absolutely true. However, you can get one. And if you don't get some offensive ability from Greg Roman to be able to manipulate coverages, from be able to do things he did not show the ability to do. If you look at a lot of what Sammy Watkins did in Buffalo, a lot of it was vertical routes. Like, there wasn't a lot of scheming Sammy Watkins open. A lot of it was Tyrod hitting Sammy on vertical routes. And that's kind of the book on Greg Roman, is that his run game playbook is really, really big. And his pass game playbook is a little less big. Right. And that idea that you marry it with the pass game and the run game together, That's not really a Greg Roman thing. And what you were describing, Joe, that specific Cole Beasley route, right? It's called a go concept. And not to be confused with the go route, it's actually a run and shoot concept. So Cole Beasley actually brought it with him from SMU and talked to Brian Dable about it. It's called a go concept. It's an option route that ends up becoming a vertical. And so that's something that you don't see it in Greg Roman's playbook. That's not what it is. All the creativity comes from the counter run game. And there's a lot of things they're doing that are fascinating in the run game. But if you look at the pass game, it's actually fairly elementary from a Ravens standpoint. And it's always been that way with Greg Roman. So listen, I'm not here to tell you that Lamar Jackson's an elite level passer. I'm here to tell you that if Lamar Jackson has Brian Dable, we might know for sure.
So as we transition, we're going to do this backwards. As we transition to 2021 Josh Allen, and then just so everybody knows, you're listening to the Hump Day Hotline. Everything, all the graphics are covered up. You're tuned into the Hump Day Hotline. I'm your co-host Joe Miller, my co-host over there, my bestie Jay Spence, special guest Bruce exclusive. Subscribe, like, whatever you got to do. Regardless of all that, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 2021, but we're going to talk about it because of this question. We're going to talk about, and this is the second time this question was asked in pretty much this format from Spin 0481. We're going to go regression to plateau to growth. Does that make sense, Bruce? So we're going to start with regression. What does regression look like? What does plateau look like? What does growth look like from Josh Allen? And then we'll transition to when and why the Bills should potentially extend Josh Allen. So first question, define regression going into 2021, because Allen can have less stats from last year and still improve and not regress. What does a regression year in 2020 look like, in your opinion? And is it possible? Like, right? I mean, do we see Josh Allen falling off a cliff?
Falling off a cliff? Absolutely not. I've said this before. I don't think you're getting 2019 Josh Allen back again. I don't think that's realistic. I really don't. I understand that there might be some legitimate concerns that 2020 is an outlier, but 2019 Josh Allen, I don't think is coming back. He's grown too much as a player. Qualitatively, the film looks so different than it did. It wasn't just Mitch Trubisky being propped up by Matt Nagy in a kiddie pool offense. That's not what this was. And the second you hear that from other fans, well, is Brian Dable, propping up Josh Allen. Okay, well then how come Josh Allen didn't look like this in 2018, 2019? Was Brian Dable not propping him up? Did Brian Dable suddenly figure out how to prop up a quarterback in his 7th year as an offensive coordinator? Is that when the light bulb went on for Brian Dable? Because that's not how this works. Brian Dable's offense isn't the kiddie pool, it's the deep end.
Right.
That's not how this works. So I'm not interested in that argument. So absolutely he could regress, but 2019 Josh Allen's not coming back. So I think the first thing we have to establish is, are you talking about a regression as far as volume statistics go? Or are you talking about as a regression when it comes to efficiency statistics? So shameless plug. I am actually talking about this tomorrow on the Bruce exclusive that drops on Thursday. I specifically planned it because of this conversation, because I knew we were going to talk about this. And one of the things we're going to talk about is that regression that happens due to specific reasons isn't regression at all. So if you have less yards per game and less touchdowns per game because the defense is better, that's not regression. If you have less touchdowns per game and less yards per game because the running game is better and you don't need to do as much, that's not regression either. Regression is want to and can't.
Right.
Want to do what I did before, can't do what I did before. So if Josh Allen throws for 4,200 yards instead of 4,500 yards in one more game, that's not necessarily a regression. Show me his efficiency statistics. Show me QBR. Show me EPA per play. Show me the stuff that makes up QB stew. Then I'll start to tell you whether or not it's regression. So let's start with that. Regression via volume statistics, I might not even be willing to listen to you. That's one of the ways you know you're listening to an uneducated fan. Oh, he threw for 4,500 yards in 2020, and in 2021, he only threw for 4,200 yards in one more game. He regressed. Right? You don't know how math works. That's not my fault. Okay? That's not my fault. So the way it works is, first off, right off the bat, I will not accept arguments that are related to statistics that are raw and are related to the reason why there was a quote unquote regression as to lack of opportunity or lack of necessity. So that's right off. Let's just cross that off. So now we move on and say, okay, efficiency statistics. Let's say he regresses a little bit. Josh Allen was good enough that he could regress and be a top 5 quarterback.
Agreed.
That's how good he was in 2020. That's how good he was in 2020, which means there has to be a significant amount of regression before I'm even going to blink. Like if there's a little bit of regression, if he goes from a Stu score of 3.57 to 4.8, I'm just going to go, okay, whatever.
Right.
That's within margin of error. I'm not even going to blink. That doesn't even count as regression for me. You're still a top 5 quarterback. You're still a Super Bowl quality quarterback. So we're starting to narrow down what it is that regression means. First off, I will not accept your volume statistics that are quote unquote regressions because certain other aspects of the team are better. And Josh Allen doesn't have to lead that 80-yard drive at the end of the game, which cuts 80 yards off his total right there. So that's what I won't accept. The second thing I won't accept is I won't accept regression in efficiency statistics that are within margin of error and still a top 5 quarterback. Because that's not really regression. That's just understanding that not everybody can be that good all the time. Instead, oh, bummer. He's just spectacular instead of transcendent. Oh, no. Sure. What have we done? So after all those things get whittled away, then we come back with, okay, what is actual regression? It's regression in the holistic metrics that we mentioned, and it has to be significant enough to move the needle. It has to be significant enough, like we saw from Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson 2019 to Lamar Jackson 2020, that's what regression looks like.
Right.
Lamar Jackson in 2019, QB Stu 3.71. Reminder, lower number is better. 3.71. Lamar Jackson 2020, 15.57. He went from being number 1 in the league in Stu all the way in 2019 and winning the MVP. Ironically enough, QB Stu is a shockingly good predictor of NFL MVPs, which is kind of weird. Number 1 to number 16. That's regression. So until I see that level of regression, I won't blink.
Gotcha. So yeah, I would agree with that. Spence.
Yes, sir.
No, I thought you had a question.
No, I told you, I'm just listening. You guys are killing us.
Gotcha. So I guess the question that I would have from a follow-up from that standpoint is we talk a lot or we hear a lot or there's conversations a lot about quarterbacks in books. You know, when you think about quarterbacks, and generally speaking, when you think about books being written on quarterbacks, it's always been about athletic quarterbacks, which Josh Allen is an athletic quarterback. And what happens is you know when you're talking about Vince Young, when you're talking about these guys, there's been very few and far between athletic running quarterbacks. Steve Young is probably one of the few that at some point in time a defense hasn't figured him out, hasn't been able to shut him down, a defensive coordinator, or they haven't been able to take away what he's best at to basically shut him down. And I think that's a good question that I would have for you, or we would have for you, is what are the chances that, and I think I know the answer, what are the chances that there can be a book written on Josh Allen to the point of where we see that regression happen because it's like, well, we figured him out. He's done. He's cooked. Finish him.
Let me counter with this. What's Josh Allen's gimmick?
His gimmick?
What's his gimmick? What's his thing? His one thing?
Strong arm. You know, people talk about his arm.
Doesn't like to go down.
Okay.
It's one of those two.
Now,
unless you have something.
Quarterbacks
I guess
who
maybe
get
I'm understanding the question differently because, like, to me, a gimmick for Lamar Jackson is that he's a running quarterback. You know, that's his gimmick. So when people think about Josh, I'm thinking that they're talking about his arm strength. Or was it different? What did you mean by the question?
No, that's I wanted you to interpret it exactly the way you did. Perfect. And the reason I say that is because the easier your gimmick is to defend, the easier you are to defend. It's that simple. The book on a quarterback becomes a lot simpler when it's 2 pages long. It could be the best book in the world, but if it's only 2 pages long, eventually you're going to figure it out. The breadth of material necessary to learn. So think about, let's go ahead and break that metaphor down. Okay. When you say the book on a quarterback, okay, the metaphor there is that you could buy a book on Josh Allen. You could read it and then understand it and know how to counter it. That's where the metaphor comes from. The bigger the book, the harder that is.
Correct.
Tom Brady is not doing anything different. His book is just so long, right, that he can just beat you from the pocket with 4 million different route combinations and different pre-snap reads and different pocket movements and all these different things where you're like, listen, I understand the book. Okay. I get it. I've read the book, but I'm on page 37 and he's on page 496. Mm-hmm. That's the reason why you draft on traits. So one of the Bruceisms, right, that we've talked about before is that traits give you options. Mm-hmm. The reason why traits are what you get drafted on is because the more traits you have, the more options you have as an offensive coordinator and as a quarterback. The more options you have, the bigger your book is. The bigger your book is, the harder it is for defenses to get it nailed. That's the reason why it matters. Josh Allen isn't a gimmick. That's the thing. The offense isn't a gimmick. So let's line it up. Okay. We've already talked about Greg Roman and his offense is getting figured out, right? Figured out with Cap, figured out with Tyrod, maybe figured out a little bit with Lamar Jackson. He's going to have to innovate. He's going to have to adapt. So the offense isn't gimmicky. Chip Kelly, the offense got figured out. It was brand new. Is anything that Brian Dable is doing, is any of it a gimmick?
No.
Is anything that Josh Allen is doing a gimmick?
At this point, no. But that, like, as you're talking, I'm literally thinking to myself, he was a bit gimmicky in 18 and 19.
Yes, absolutely. I'm literally about to say it. When he was running for 100 yards a game, back-to-back games, that was gimmicky. That would have gotten figured out.
Right.
But he wasn't doing that. Josh Allen's rushing totals have dropped every single year in the league.
Right.
He's becoming less reliant on the legs. He's dropping 400-yard games on people now. So you run into things that are... So a lot of people are running quarters now in the NFL. That's just a big part of what defenses do. One of the ways you beat quarters is by deep overs. Josh Allen's become really good at the deep overs, right? You get that little hip pop that he learned from Jordan Palmer to keep that left hip from locking out, where you can drop it over the top. That's something you saw literally week one to Stephon Diggs. You saw deep over beating quarters. Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, that's a tool. That is a tool in the bag. The more tools you have in the bag, the more traits you have, the more options you have. So at that point, you just got to make sure you're not being held back by the offensive coordinator. So right. I'm not saying Josh Allen can't regress. I'm saying him being figured out will not be the reason why.
It's good.
My question about this whole thing, so like the whole topic of regression and everything, I struggle with this one because, so for instance, when we talked about Lamar, and I know you bring up your stew, I feel it's tough to look at it and say, okay, he regressed, when you also have to look at the other factors. I'm not disputing what your stew is and everything that we're talking, but what I'm saying is, like, when you look at certain teams, like you mentioned Greg Roman, they figured out the offensive coordinator. Mm-hmm. With the Bills, we got a new receiver. We got, so I mean, like, things changed for the Bills last year that didn't change for Lamar. So while I do think Lamar did regress, what I'm saying is with Josh this year, I agree with you when you say you don't see it happening to the point where, like, you think he's going to go back to the old Josh and you think that's a thing of the past. But man, now maybe this is the homer part that Joe was talking about at the beginning, because I don't think that I'm a homer, but looking at this, I see a lot of the traits in Josh Allen that I saw in Aaron Rodgers years ago. Ooh. So now I'm excited as a fan because it's like, wait, do we have like Aaron Rodgers 2.0 now? Like, he's bigger, he's stronger, he can run guys over, and he has the cannon. He has it looks like the accuracy is there. He's making those throws. So I just have a tough time thinking about regression when I see the traits that you're talking about. I don't see a true regression happening unless, like you said, he just literally falls off a cliff.
I agree with you. I understand that. And this is what the conversation revolves around, is that how notable would he have to drop for it to even be considered a regression? Because we've already established that Lamar went from 1st to 16th in the league in those composite metrics, mm-hmm. right? Josh Allen, he goes from 2nd to 5th. Is that even are we even going to call that a regression? I would not call that a regression because it's within margin of error.
It's top 5,
Right.
Just read that and take it in, Bruce. Just read that and take it in.
Go back and listen to the Thanksgiving Go back and listen to the Thanksgiving Day episode of the Bruce exclusive from 2020. I did a lot of work on holistic metrics there.
Can I just add to this conversation about you saying go back and listen to the Thanksgiving episode of Bruce? I have no effing clue what I talked about any specific week in my podcast ever. And like the date on
I do
on January 15th at
yes,
whatever. Anyways, yes,
I have sticky notes. They help me remember.
I've seen that part of the movie where you got sticky notes, and the dog is actually covered in them as well.
Absolutely. All prayers will be converted to emails.
So
prayer Post-it notes.
It's so good. That movie is so good. So moving on from regression to plateauing, and what I love about the concept or idea of plateauing is when you were on my show on the Overreaction Pod last year before the season, you made the statement, and it was powerful, and it carried me through the season, that a plateau year for Josh Allen in 2020 was a regression year. Clearly, that definition has changed mightily from 20 to 21. Talk about a plateau year.
A plateau year for Josh Allen in 2021 is fantastic. I would make an argument that a plateau year is probably a step up in the similar sense to the way that a plateau year from 2019 to 2020 would have been considered a relative regression. I would consider this a relative progression in the event that Josh Allen repeats all his statistics from obviously the volume could potentially be higher because you have an extra game than you had. So you have to consider that. But just looking at the efficiency metric, looking at the DVOA, EPA per play, QBR, all that stuff like that, if he repeats that, that's pretty good. Like, that's staggering, because the understanding is that, again, this was an MVP level year.
Right.
We need to understand that MVPs don't have MVP level years every year. Let me rephrase that. MVP caliber players do not have MVP caliber years every year. Aaron Rodgers doesn't have that year every year. Tom Brady doesn't have that year every year. Matt Ryan didn't have that year every year. He had that year one time, and he won the MVP with Kyle Shanahan as offensive coordinator, and then he promptly left San Francisco. Cam Newton had that year when he won the MVP. People who are MVP candidates still don't have MVP caliber years every year, which means if Josh Allen has an MVP caliber year again in 2021, that's a progression, not a regression, because that's the level of play that we're seeing from him right now.
Right. My biggest question, because honestly, like having this discussion about progression and earlier regression, I mean, and I know it's tough to say because of the fact that it was an amazing year. And if it wasn't for Aaron Rodgers, he would have been the MVP last year. Is it possible that we see a better Josh Allen this year?
Possible? Sure. It's absolutely possible. You know how I know? Because Aaron Rodgers was better than Josh Allen. So clearly there is a level above where, now it's not high above, but it is above where Josh Allen was in 2020. Is it possible? Sure. Absolutely. It's possible. I'm not saying it's probable, but more important, it's not necessary. Let's talk about that. So a level above the 2020 version of Josh Allen may be improbable because very few people ever reach that, right? We established that the MVP of the league had a lesser Stu score than Josh Allen had in 2020. So you can have MVPs that aren't as good as Josh Allen played in 2020. So there is a level above it. It might be improbable, but more important than it being improbable is it's unnecessary. You don't need to get that level of play to win the Super Bowl. You know how I know that? Because Tom Brady didn't play at that level and he won the Super Bowl. Aaron Rodgers played at that level and didn't win the Super Bowl.
Didn't win.
Deshaun Watson played at that level and his team went 4-12 because they were tire fire.
Right.
So yes, it's possible, but I'm not even going to waste any of my emotional or mental effort figuring out whether or not it could be possible because it's not necessary.
Right.
We have checked the binary for level of play necessary for that quarterback to be the plurality of the reason why you win a Super Bowl. Box checked. For 2021, if he checks the box again, good. Then at that point, if we don't win the Super Bowl, I'm not going to be looking at Josh Allen. I'm going to be looking at the remainder of team because that's the other part of the equation.
Yeah, the defense, clearly. The defense this year is so much of it is the defense this year. If the defense can do what the defense needs to do or should do or can return to a 2019 form, the sky's the limit for this football team. Chris Jenke with a question for you guys. How much does the schedule factor into Josh's potential progression? Many think the Bills' schedule this year is easier than last year. I'm one of those people.
Well, before Bruce jumps in, I'm at the point where I don't feel like the schedule when you're talking about the top quarterbacks, like it matters who you play because you have better defenses or worse defenses. But I'm really getting to the point where I'm looking at these guys that when you're talking about the top 5, top 6 quarterbacks, it really doesn't matter who they play. The fact is they're good and they come out week in and week out. And last season, we saw what Josh Allen did to top defenses multiple times during the season and in the postseason. Not just like 1 week he did this and then no, he consistently was putting up yards on top defenses. So I don't think that the schedule, I don't think it's much of a factor at all for his regression or progression. I think at this point it just comes down to, are the other teams as prepared as they should be? Is the book, what you guys mentioned earlier, is the book written on Josh, and can they figure that out? I don't think it, because honestly, man, last year he shocked us all, but he was doing it consistently. I just don't see the schedule being a factor.
I would agree with that. I also think that it's really kind of dangerous to look at schedule early. We don't know what these teams are going to look like week 8 and week 10. I do think that strength of schedule is one of the weirdest and probably most overrated metrics that we use to judge difficulty, because the NFL isn't necessarily a league of parity when you have elite quarterbacks who are consistently in the playoffs all the time. But it is a big amount of parity when it comes to defenses. It's very hard to consistently maintain a good defense for a long period of time. So when you're looking at that and you're looking at your own quarterback and you're going, okay, well, is he going to regress? Is he going to be against better defenses? You don't necessarily know what those defenses are going to look like. And some of these teams that you can always tell in your fantasy league who doesn't actually watch the games, because they draft Spence knows exactly what I'm talking about. What ends up happening is they'll draft name defenses that are good in name, but they're not actually good, right? Because you just assume, like, you see these teams who draft the Bears defense every year or the Ravens defense every year, and you go, okay, well, the Colts defense was better than them for a lot, but they don't have the name. It's the same thing with strengths of schedule. With strength of schedule, we go, okay, well, yeah, they were good last year, but think about a team like the Colts. The Colts got above average play from Phillip Rivers last year. If they get 2020 Carson Wentz again, they ain't making the playoffs. If they get 2017 Carson Wentz, they're a Super Bowl contender. That's the swing for the Colts based on quarterback play. So if you have the Colts on your schedule, how do you know? You don't know. So strength of schedule is weird. As a general rule, I have a tendency to take it one game at a time. I know that's incredibly cliche, but I'm not taking it that way because it's a cliche. I'm taking it that way because the math has a tendency to lay it out that way.
Super good.
Well, no, I mean, and it's right to do it anyway, because, I mean, think about it. There's a new team in the playoffs every year, or not every year, but, there's a new team in the playoffs frequently. So if it's based on strength of schedule and you're looking at the teams last year who didn't make the playoffs, or the teams last year who were, 3-13, it doesn't mean that next year they're going to be 3-13 just by saying, oh, last year they weren't that good. Right. So I'm with you, Bruce. I take it one game at a time.
Real big for Chris Jenke, just saying that a lot of the Josh Allen detractors, obviously not Bills fans, say that Josh Allen hasn't beaten good teams. Josh Allen, maybe he hasn't beaten quote unquote good teams. He's beaten a lot of good defenses, especially in 2020. He dumbfounded and befuddled great defensive coordinators and defensive head coaches in 2020. And to me, that speaks for itself. As we transition, because I want to go ahead.
Well, I just don't know. And maybe if it was season before, I don't think is that still, just Chris, real quick, if you can throw in the comments, is that still something that is that like the narrative on Josh? Because I don't know how people can say that now if we made it to the AFC Championship. Like, I just, but that was all.
We got 15 minutes left. I want to make sure that we get to the contract talk, because Bruce has, in my opinion, some of the best insight as it pertains to when and why to extend a quarterback based on history, and I want to at least get that out into the people that they're watching and listening right now. 2019 to 2020. So 2020 plateau year means regression. I'm just going to finish this up. 2021 plateau year means floor, which is amazing when you think about how far Josh Allen has come from 2020 to 2021. Plateau in 2020, regression. Plateau in 2021, progression, if not floor. And if this is his floor, we're in for a lot of good football for the next 10 to 15 years from this kid who loves this city, loves this team, and loves this fan base. Let's talk about Wildest Dreams Land, which I talked about all of 2020. Wildest Dreams Land. Wildest Dreams Land would be this kid progresses. Do you see, is it possible this kid could get better? Has he reached his ceiling, Bruce?
I think it's possible he can get better qualitatively, and you can not see that reflected in a lot of the metrics.
Smarter, like more, what's the word? Just being smarter with the football.
Yeah, being smarter with the football. There are still moments where you go, okay, you probably shouldn't have done that. And he himself talked about being better ball placement on the in-breaking routes as being something he was working on. So it's not like he can't get better qualitatively. It's hard to get a lot better metrically than he was, but you can still get better qualitatively. So absolutely, that's the case. Yeah,
sure. And this is a great question from Michael. Another hard question for the guys. This to me is not a hard question. Could Josh overcome a multi-game absence from Diggs to still have a dominant season? This is important because Diggs' first season when he did not have an injury and miss several games or a couple games was 2020. What is your thought first? And if I need to answer, I will, but can he overcome Diggs having missed a couple games?
I think this is the reason you go out and get Emmanuel Sanders.
I agree.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, to me, what points to Josh having success, even with Diggs being out, is the amount of touchdowns he threw to other receivers, the amount of completions he threw to other receivers. Like Diggs, as much as he was the guy, Josh put the ball all over the football. Like rarely do you see receivers like have that much production with a guy that had the amount of production that Diggs had in a season, right?
Yeah, and the offense can flow through Diggs, but Brian Dable can manufacture touches for other players as well. Close to the red zone,
right.
A lot of times that's where you saw the more gadgety and gimmicky of the stuff because he was manufacturing things for Isaiah McKenzie on the jet sweep. He was manufacturing tackle-eligible plays. You saw third-string running backs catching touchdowns. This is the reason why I think he could absorb that. Now, you're never going to get the best version of a quarterback without his best receiver. That's just not going to happen.
Right.
But if you think he's going to revert to 2019 Josh Allen, I would argue the reason you go out and get Emmanuel Sanders is so you can have someone who has experience being a go-to guy in this league and can operate a lot of the same route tree as Stephon Diggs. I'm not saying Emmanuel Sanders is Stephon Diggs. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you can't ask him to do something that he can't do, but Stephon Diggs can do from a route concept standpoint. That's just not something Emmanuel Sanders can do at all. He can win in the intermediates. He still has the gas to be able to beat vertically. He can separate and uncover short areas. You can still do things where you can manufacture close to the red zone because close to the red zone, that's kind of historically where you need someone to get yourself a bucket. Sometimes, just like in basketball, you need someone to get you a bucket. And when you don't have someone who can get you a bucket, you got to manufacture it. And Brian Dable can do that.
Right.
And Bruce, speaking about Emmanuel Sanders, one of the things is too, I know a lot of people from what I've been seeing, especially once we signed him in free agency, a lot of people are thinking that, he's older now. He's lost a step. He's not as quick. He's not as fast. I'm going to just tell you something. He was playing with Drew Brees last year. And I know that Drew Brees is a legend, so I'm not going to say anything negative about Drew Brees. But at the point of his career last year, Drew Brees is he's not Josh Allen. And I'm not saying historically Josh Allen is better than Drew Brees, but last year he definitely was better than Drew Brees. And if you give Emmanuel Sanders a guy with a gun like Josh Allen, we're going to see a completely different. We're going to see Emmanuel Sanders from Denver. Maybe not the exact, but that's what we're getting now. And it's just an exciting offense to look at, man.
Mm. And I'm going to throw in there. I thought Bruce would have a comment, but I'm going to throw in there as well. If you're playing Texas Hold'em, you got two cards in the hole. And one of those cards are generally more important as it pertains to five cards being on the table. And one of those cards in the hole that we have that we don't know what it's going to amount to is Isaiah Hodgins, who, by the way, I have an exclusive interview with this week on the Overreaction Show on Sunday night at 9 o'clock. So if you're listening to us right now, make sure you tune back in Sunday night, 9 p.m. On the Overreaction Pod. Joe's going to have me. I'm going to have Isaiah Hodgins on. But there's the gold that can be struck if Isaiah Hodgins is who we potentially are being told that he could potentially be. He flashed last year in preseason, right? He's flashed this year in OTAs and minicamp. If this kid amounts to something, to me, the draft capital that saves, the capital they don't have to spend on a receiver, or the trades that they don't have to spend, or the money they don't have to spend on a receiver is huge. But it'll be interesting to see what Isaiah Hodgins turns into. But yeah, that along with Emmanuel Sanders. Go ahead.
Well, I have a real question about him, because I do like him, and there was a lot of talk about him last summer, and then a few weeks ago there was some talk about him still saying that he's performing really well. But with the depth that we have on his team, do you really think that he can? And I'm not saying this in a bad way. I'm literally asking the question to both of you. Do you really think that he has what it takes to carve out a space on this roster?
Bruce?
Carve out a space on the roster? Sure. I think he'd be a rosterable player. Carve out a role week over week? No, I don't think so.
I think for me, he would have to be something else. He would have to be Stevie Johnson, 7th round-esque, like, oh, everybody missed on him but us, which is not impossible. We, as Bills fans, have seen it happen here. For me, for him to carve out a roster spot, the reality is we are living in a space where the Bills are going to be cutting good players that are going to go to other teams and be starters. The Bills are going to be cutting. So, yeah, he could. And you could see a guy like Isaiah McKenzie or somebody like that end up not on this football team and on another football team. So I think he could absolutely have a roster spot. He could carve out a spot for himself. It could be difficult. We'll see. Yeah. But we didn't have much hope for Gabe Davis last year either. And look at how much of a contributor he ended up being, right?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And like I said, I wasn't asking from a negative place, because I think Hodgins, I think he's going to surprise some people. I don't think he's going to take, kind of like Bruce said, I don't think he's going to take a huge, piece of the pie for the offense. But I think he's going to surprise some people. I hope he does. I want to see all these guys do well.
Okay, I got to stop. Eli, I love you, and I love your contribution to the show. There is no way this happens. Cole Beasley is not getting cut from this roster. Do either of you have a comment about that? Does Cole Beasley get cut from this roster?
No, I talk to Eli all the time, and sometimes I have to tell him Eli, you got to chill, man. And this is one of those times that I'm a DM you, Eli. I'm gonna just say it like I normally do. You got to chill, but I'm about to DM it to you right now. You got to chill.
Yeah, and Michael, I would tell you, Isaiah Hodgins probably does not have the frame to be a special teams player, as far as that goes. I know Isaiah. I've stood next to Isaiah. He's tall and lanky, skinny. Think tall, skinny wide receiver. He doesn't really have the frame to be a gunner or necessarily a super big.
He's laughing. I told him you got to chill.
Jeff King says, with the talent pool we have in the receiving core, I believe we can lose one, and still be formidable and defeat teams. May not be as dominant, but Dable will draw up the right plan to make it work. I agree, and I think that's the conversation we're having as it pertains to Lamar versus Allen. How much of a difference Roman is versus Dable, and Dable continuing to be able to grow Allen and throw more stuff at him to allow him to grow and continue to grow, potentially not regress, but plateau, and what that means versus Lamar, who didn't have the same coach in Greg Roman. I think we're pretty much all in the same place there. So last 5 minutes of the show, and then we're going to end this thing. Bruce, you are very pointed, and you are very what's the word I'm going to use? Not schooled, but you're very pragmatic in why or why not to extend a quarterback after 1 year of success. I know where you lie. I know we're friends. I know where you sit. We've talked about it a lot. I've read a lot of your tweets. I've listened to a lot of your shows. You feel the Bills should at least wait to see 1 more year of success from Allen prior to extending him versus extending him too early. Talk about the pitfalls on why you don't do it this soon.
So my general theory on stance, let's go stance. My general stance on the Josh Allen contract is I think they will do it this offseason. I will not throw a fit if they do. I would wait 1 more year. And here's why. So here's the list of quarterbacks who signed a starting quarterback market second contract after 0 or 1 seasons of 60 plus in QBR. Jimmy Garoppolo, Carson Wentz, Derek Carr, Jared Goff, Blake Bortles, Andy Dalton, Ryan Tannehill, Jacoby Brissett. Here are the quarterbacks who signed a starting market quarterback contract after 2 or more seasons of 60 or more QBR. Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, Andrew Luck, Cam Newton, Colin Kaepernick. First off, let's do a little Q&A with myself here. Bruce, why did you use 60 or more QBR? Because that seems arbitrary. Well, first off, I can't do Stu for all these years. If I could, I would. But QBR is one of the most well-rounded quarterback metrics. It accounts for rushing. And 50 is considered average, which means 60 would be considered to be above average. So how many above average years did they have by QBR? Bruce, what about Kirk Cousins and Dak Prescott? Well, neither Kirk Cousins or Dak Prescott signed a market starting quarterback second contract while they were on a rookie wage scale deal. They were both tagged when the deal was up, and then they played on the tag. But, Bruce, none of those quarterbacks in the top section had the peak that Josh Allen did. Actually, no, that's not true. Allen had a QBR of 81.7 in 2020. Wentz in 2017 was 78.5. Jimmy G in 2017 was 82.7. So that's not true. They both had peaks just as high as Josh Allen. Well, I mean, come on, Bruce. It doesn't make any sense. Jimmy Garoppolo played in 6 games in 2017, and Wentz played in 13. Exactly. Thank you for sharing my opinion that sample size matters. So congratulations on that. But Bruce, if we don't sign Josh Allen now, the price is going to go up. Yep, you're absolutely right. The biggest competing argument to this is not just that the price is going to go up. The reason why I won't freak out if Josh Allen signs a contract is because of the quarterback contract deals that are coming. Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, and the new TV money. The new TV money changes this conversation. If you want to make an argument that is based on we need to sign him right now, that's the way you do it. The new TV money is going to cause the cap to spike. Quarterback contracts will continue to inflate, but they will inflate at a more significant rate than they were previously. Because previously, based on the way the market had moved, by waiting another year, it's costing you $5 to $7 million in average annual value. But if the TV money increases it, it could increase it more. If you want to make an argument, that's the way to do it. Oh, well, Bruce, it doesn't matter if we sign him and he regresses. Tell that to the Rams. Tell that to the Eagles. Tell that to the Niners. Tell that to the Jaguars. They all did suffer or are making decisions to avoid suffering big cap issues because of their quarterback contracts.
Right.
If you make behavioral organizational changes, then that means it's having an effect. If you are doing things to try to avoid the cap hit, or if you're making strategic maneuvers to try to soften the cap hit, then by definition, it's having an effect on you. One of the ways that you see the impact of cap for teams is in the moves they don't make. It's the opportunity cost that comes along from that albatross contract. Well, Bruce, if we don't sign him now, we risk alienating him. Look at the Dak Prescott situation. Okay, first off, that's a completely different situation. Dak had 2 years of 60-plus QBR on a 4-year deal headed into the last year of his contract. Allen has 1 year of 60-plus QBR headed into the 4th year of a 5th-year deal, assuming he gets the 5th-year option, which he does.
Right.
Oh, what kind of message does it send to the fans, Bruce? Prudence? That's the message it sends to the fans, just like everything else. So the last argument you could possibly make is, well, it's going to happen whether you like it or not, Bruce. I agree with you. I think it's going to happen this offseason. But this conversation isn't about whether or not that should happen. It's whether or not whether it should happen, not whether or not it will. So It's probably going to happen, and I'm probably going to be fine with it.
Right.
If it was me, I would wait. But the fact of the matter is that it's all about the things that I weight and how significantly I weight them versus the things that you weight and how significantly you weight them.
Correct.
We all agree on the facts I just mentioned. It's the emotional weight we apply to each individual factor that ends up determining what side of this argument you fall on. And so for you, it's going to become more expensive. You might weight that a lot more. And for me, I might weight the bad things happen when you give out huge contracts and you have a regression to reasonable. Here's the thing. Josh Allen doesn't have to regress to 2019 for it to be a bad contract. He could regress to slightly better than 2019. It still would be a bad contract.
Right.
Because 2019 Josh was not franchise level Josh. I'm not interested in signing 2019 Josh Allen to a $42 million contract a year. I'm not interested in that. I don't think he was a really good player in 2019. I think he was meh. He was fine. Okay. So I would personally wait for all the reasons we just said. I spent all that time writing out that Q&A in expectation for this pod, specifically so I could break down any potential questions I might get. So would I wait? Yeah. Am I going to throw a fit if they do it? Nah, I'm fine.
Yeah. We've clearly argued as to what a plateau, what the potential for another step means for this kid, how deep of a regression we're talking. I think the biggest issue about signing him now versus signing him later is you're talking about the difference between they sign him now $42 million. They sign him later $52 million, $55. What if he wins a Super Bowl this year? $55 million. Right? I mean, that's literally the landscape that we're talking about as far as what this looks like if this kid takes another step and this team wins a Super Bowl. He's the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, crushing the Pat Mahomes contract, which is a bad contract, by the way. Christian Gimmick, who I believe is the leader of the Bills Mafia Babes. What did they used to call him? Sugar High Josh. Do you think we see less and less of that chaoticness from him as time goes on? Or do you think it's just sewn in Josh thread? So do we see less? Has he matured? I guess that's the question. With the fans coming back in the stands, I'm on record as saying muscle memory, an entire season of having no fans in the stands for the most part, and that muscle memory piece, 16 games in and out. When the fans come back, I don't believe we're going to see Sugar High Josh, and we'll let you go after this. Do you feel that there's a situation where we're going to see Sugar High Josh again when the fans are back, or do you think that's gone?
That seems unlikely to be a consistent part of Josh Allen, but I think it's always going to be a little part of Josh Allen.
He's a gamer. He's a gamer for sure. I'm with you, bro. I think that prudence would speak to letting Josh Allen spend or have one more season just to see what he has, take that risk. And if you end up having to pay him $52 million a year, then it's probably for a good reason that you're paying him $52 million a year. Versus paying him 42. If you pay him 42 this year, we're not going to be angry. I don't see from I'm with you. I think Spence is with you. I don't see a gigantic step back. I hate to say it. I'm sorry, Spence. A Cam Newton-esque step back from an outlier year. I don't see that in Josh's future necessarily based on the way that he's playing. And obviously his offensive coordinator this year, 2022 could spell something different if Dable becomes a head coach.
Well, no, but either way, I'm hoping that Josh never gets injured like Cam. You know what I mean? I hope Josh never has the type of offense around him like Cam had in New England last year.
Agreed.
So I'm very much hoping so I don't even take offense to that. Like I really hope he doesn't have a Cam Newton-esque regression because that would be absolutely horrible for Buffalo as a community and as a team. That would be horrible.
For sure. But we're going to wrap this thing up. We've been on this thing for a little bit over an hour. For myself, Joe Miller, you can find me on Twitter at Joe Miller Wired. I also am the host of the Overreaction podcast that airs on this channel, 9:00 p.m. on Sunday nights, right here on YouTube. And then it drops on Monday mornings or Monday afternoons at 12 o'clock for Jay Spence the King. Tell them where they can find you, Jay Spence.
I am here live, same place, Monday nights, and I normally in podcast form I go live Tuesday morning. So, and then we got the man, the legend himself, Bruce Nolan. Why don't you let everybody know when they can find you, where your show is, man?
Guys, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a good time. I'm glad I got a chance to be a part of it. I appreciate you thinking of me when it came to this topic. I hope I was able to hold up my end of the bargain. My name is Bruce Nolan. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Bruce Exclusive. And my show, The Bruce Exclusive, drops every Thursdays and Fridays on the Buffalo Rumblings Podcast Network.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. I'm not gonna lie, Spence. I'm the same as you. Bruce starts talking and I'm like,
Yeah, no, and so I want to apologize to everybody in the comments too, because normally I'm very super talkative, but when I tell you guys I'm really like a fan of Bruce, and he's my friend, but I'm really a fan of Bruce.
Same.
So like when he's on shows with me, or if I really sit there and listen. So I apologize if anybody was like, "Why isn't Spence talking?" I just love listening to Bruce.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you have been watching and listening to the Hump Day Hotline on the Buffalo Rumblings Multicast Network. Like, subscribe, hump that like, subscribe, especially if you're on YouTube, subscribe. But for me, Joe Miller, go Bills. Jay Spence the King,
go Bills.
Bruce,
you gotta unmute yourself.
Go Bills.
Love you
Rookie
guys.
move.
Hey, make sure you all tune in to Bruce's podcast that's going to drop tomorrow morning, Thursday. He's going to wrap up more of this content. If you love the content you had tonight, tune into Bruce tomorrow. We'll talk to you guys later.